If you go back to that moment, I was getting frustrated because I perceived some rudeness. And I actually, if you remember the way it happened, it's been a little while, so I don't remember the exact thing, but you can roll the tape. It's probably the most famous thing I've ever done, or maybe ever will do.
I've watched it probably 10 times.
But there was a reporter who asked a question, and I think the president answered it, and then I answered it too. And then Zelensky didn't like my answer, and that's kind of what started the tit for tat. And then, of course, it just completely went off the rails after that. And look, I think the takeaway from that for me, but also I think for any foreign leader who comes to the Oval Office in particular, like when you're meeting, a couple hours ago, the president was sitting down with the prime minister of Japan. It's one thing when the president goes to the prime minister of Japan. It's another thing when the prime minister of Japan comes to the Oval Office, right? And you try to basically respect the rules of the house that you're in. And if you come to the Oval Office, you come to the People's White House in the United States of America, there's an expectation that you're going to show the head of state, the president of the United States, a little bit of respect. If you're going to disagree, which of course everybody should feel free to disagree, it's why we have these conversations, is to flesh out disagreements and try to identify common interest. You can do it in a particularly productive way, or you can do it in an unproductive way.
Do you think it served its purpose, though, because it actually, as you say, President Zelensky has behaved in a much more respectful manner since? And was that a necessary kind of reset from the Joe Biden times, which was whatever Ukraine wants, we just give it to them?
I think so. I actually think airing everything out, doing it in public, actually articulating where there were disagreements and where there were common interests actually was pretty productive. And I do think that now the relationship is much more productive. And one of the things that we've tried to do, in particular, one of the things the president has tried to do is every time he talks to the Russians or the Ukrainians, it is not slogans, it's not cliches, it's what do you actually think about this? Where are the areas of disagreement? And as frustrating as it has been, and the president has said this repeatedly, he thought this was going to be the easiest war to get wrapped up. It's actually been the hardest war to get wrapped up. The reason that we've made progress is because the president has been laser focused on what is it that you actually think. And if you compare that to when Zelensky would come to town during the Biden administration and everybody would wave the flag and everybody would talk about how great everything was, there was not any real diplomacy that happened. And under President Trump's leadership, it's been much different.
Are you surprised that the Russians are being so intransigent? They were given, the opportunity. I think what President Trump is now saying is just freeze the lines and have a ceasefire. But they're refusing to do that. And President Trump's under a lot of pressure to give Ukraine Tomahawks. He's sort of contemplated it. He doesn't like the idea that that's taking us a step forward towards, he said, World War III.
Sure.
So where are we at?
Well, one, you understand that the president asks himself the question, what is in America's best interest? And his view is America getting more involved in the conflict is not in our interest. America bringing the conflict to a close is in our interest. And so everything that he's done, from the sanctions that he's done on Russian oil companies to the conversations he's had with Zelensky to actually shifting more of the burden to the Europeans. And I think one of the things that I was frustrated with under the Biden administration, I think a lot of Americans, even Americans who are very pro-supporting Ukraine, sort of threw up their hands and said, why aren't the Europeans doing more? The President of the United States has shifted a lot of that burden onto the Europeans, which I think most Americans think is a really good idea. But it's all motivated by the question of what is in America's best interest. And I think the president continues to be laser focused on bringing the conflict to a close. That's what he thinks is in our interest. That's what he's going to keep on working on.
So sanctions is part of it?
And sometimes that's going to mean carrots and sometimes that's going to mean sticks. And we're just going to have to keep working at it. And there's a give and take to this. As we've talked about, Miranda, before, sometimes it feels like we're making progress with the Russians. And sometimes it feels like we're making progress with the Ukrainians. And sometimes it feels like we're making progress with one or the other, but neither. And that's why you see the president constantly pushing, exercising American leverage, and we're just going to keep on working at it. I can't say where exactly it's going to go, but it's going to end eventually.
So you can't predict. What would be your prediction? Like, how do you think it will end? Will it end just frozen in place? Will they just keep fighting?
It's so hard to say, Miranda. And every time that I've made a prediction privately, something has happened a month later. There was a part where, if you asked me 6 months or so ago, I would have said they're never going to stop fighting. This is going to be like Russia's Vietnam. They're going to be constantly. 15 years later, they're still going to be fighting. If you ask me, a month ago, I would have said we're making incredible progress. So it's hard to venture a prediction, but I do think that we have reached the point of diminishing returns for both sides. The amount of territory the Russians are gaining is so small, and they're losing a lot of people in the process. The Ukrainians, their electricity infrastructure and they're suffering from a lot of problems. Of course, a lot of war dead themselves. We really do believe we reached the point where it's in both Russia and Ukraine's interest to stop fighting. But look, the president can only open the door. He can't actually force either side to walk through it.
When it came to, I guess what I'm trying to ask you now is about your relationship with Donald Trump. And is there any time that you disagree with him? Like Iran, the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities would be one that I think there were a lot of people who were in the sort of MAGA, people like Tucker Carlson were very antagonistic to that because they saw it as dragging us into Israel's war or into World War III.
Sure.
What was your view going into that? And did you try and advise the president not to bomb?
Well, let me say two things. First of all, privately, of course you have disagreements, but I think it's really important for the president to be able to rely on my advice and for me to support his agenda once he's made a decision. That's kind of my attitude is I have two real responsibilities here. On the one hand, I've got to give the president honest counsel. He expects it from me. I owe it to him. But the president's going to make a decision. And when the president makes a decision, he's in charge of the government. And my attitude is I salute, I say, aye, aye, sir, and I go and execute. And both of those things really matter. Now, with the Iran thing in particular, because it's past and I think it's easy to talk about it. I think that there was a real fear from some people that any action towards Iran would lead to some sort of escalation spiral that would lead us having ground troops in Iran. And,
were you worried about that?
No, I wasn't worried about that because I saw the decisions the president was actually making. I can understand if you're on the outside looking in, you don't understand what the president's actually saying. You don't want to understand what the president actually thinks.
A surgical strike.
But he wanted to eliminate particularly the Fordo nuclear facility that only we had the ability to do. He wanted to do it while Iran's air defenses were down because that's a risky mission, even with B-2s, if they have robust air defenses. And he saw an opportunity and he went to the Iranians and he said, dismantle this facility peacefully. They said no. And he said, okay, we're going to do it non-peacefully. And because I knew that he was surgically focused on that particular issue and he was not interested in putting 100,000 troops in Iran, I felt quite confident that we could do the president's mission, that we could accomplish America's goals. And I think it was a very good thing for the United States of America, but we would not get dragged into this protracted Middle Eastern conflict. Now, to be clear, I worry about that all the time. I worry about us getting drawn into these protracted conflicts.
You were in Iraq.
But I was in Iraq. But I was not worried about it there because I saw the decision-making process the president was engaged in. Of course, I offered my counsel as it was necessary, but a lot of the criticisms levied against the president in the heat of the moment, I remember it. I remember that very well. I don't think that they were fully aware of how the president himself was thinking about it. And again, that's politics, right? You're not going to have access to every classified piece of information when you're a journalist seeing this from the outside in. From the inside, I think the president handled that perfectly, and it was very good for the country.
And there's a streak of isolationism in MAGA, and that's criticized a lot by, I guess, the neocon section of the Republican Party and the Democrat Party that are aligned. Do you see yourself as an isolationist?
No, not at all. I don't think the president's an isolationist. And I don't think that most people in MAGA are isolationists. What I do think that they are is that they are very skeptical of getting involved in foreign conflicts, because for pretty much my entire life, a lot of times we get involved in a foreign conflict and it's a total disaster. I mean, you go back to the 2016 primaries, and who was the one guy on stage saying it was a disaster for us to be involved in Iraq? That was Donald Trump. Not because Donald Trump's an isolationist, not because he would never use American military power, as we've seen in the administration, clearly he will, but because I think he recognizes that, and I've heard them say this so many times, when you go to war, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
He talks about this with Putin. Putin thought that was going to be a 1-week war, easy, He accomplished his objectives. Now, 4 years later, he's losing thousands upon thousands of Russian soldiers every single month. The president is very skeptical of war because he knows that it's unpredictable. But being skeptical of war, I think, is the exact right approach. Mm-hmm. Saying that you can never use military force, I think that's the wrong approach. It takes it too far. You've got to kind of be in the middle somewhere. And I think that's where the president's foreign policy, he's both skeptical of foreign entanglements, but he's not afraid to use American military power when he has to. And again, I'm biased. I'm the vice president of the United States. I think that's exactly where we should be.
I wanted to ask you about Hillbilly Elegy, your
Sure.
best-selling autobiography, and I guess the thing that put you on the map. At the time, it was mid-2016 when it came out, and you were called yourself a heavy never Trumper,
Yep.
very negative. You've addressed this, but so I don't want to dwell on that, but is there something about Donald Trump since you've been his vice president that surprises you, that you've, like, he is such a unique person?
Unbelievably. People have no idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what makes him tick?
Well, it's interesting. Yes, since becoming vice president, obviously, I knew him quite well. I mean, he endorsed me in my 2022 Senate race. I had gotten to know him quite well, and I became one of his big surrogates in 2023 and 2024. I think I was the first senator actually to endorse him back in the primary race in 2022. Maybe it was early 23.
Was that self-interest, or did you see something in him?
No, I really thought that he had shown an ability to stand up to the worst forces in American society with more courage and more grit than anybody else. That, and actually, it's funny, his foreign policy, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal endorsing him because I was like, this is a guy who has a robust view of what American military power can accomplish, but also kept us out of any stupid foreign conflicts.
The only president.
That really mattered.
Yeah.
That really mattered for me. What have I learned about him since becoming vice president? Let me say a few things. First of all, he has a very good heart. And, when he came, he and the first lady came for dinner a couple of weeks ago. I mean, the kids were upstairs with a babysitter, but they really wanted to see the president and the first lady. So we brought him down, and you never know what to expect. An 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, like, kids misbehave. And they were pretty well behaved, but they were kids, right? They were jumping around. They were rambunctious. They were saying totally weird shit. And he was just so good with them.
Yeah.
And I think has a natural grandfatherly way, especially with kids. He really loves kids, and they really loved him in return. And it's interesting because he's gotten to know our kids a lot. They're always in the White House, and I've never once felt like he's impatient or he just wants them out of there. He always just has a really good heart about little kids. And I think that's something I didn't appreciate about him. He has a way about him. He has a way about him where people are naturally, I think, attracted to him. He has a magnetic personality, and kids in particular are very attracted to him. I think he has, a friend of mine once said that he has animal instincts. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, like a lion in the savannah, you have to have almost a sixth sense about what's going on behind it. You have to be able to see things that you can't actually see with your eyes. And that is absolutely true about Donald Trump. He has unbelievable instincts. And sometimes, like, I remember having this conversation with Susie Wiles where there was a particular issue, and you had everybody trying to work the president. They were calling him. They were trying to influence him. They were trying to pressure him. And I was like, I got to get in there and talk to the president because I don't think he realizes these people are trying to work him. And Susie looks at me and she says, Mr. Vice President, you don't think that Donald Trump realizes that these people are trying to work him? And he just does. He automatically understands when somebody is trying to get one over on him. And that makes him such an effective leader because you can't be everywhere at once as president of the United States. But so long as you know who to trust and who not to trust, and so long as you have a way of navigating around the various pieces of counsel that you're getting, that's what makes him a great president, is that instinctive ability to know when somebody has the country's interest at heart or when they have some other interest at heart. I think that's an amazing thing. And the third thing that I'd say about him, I guess I had heard it, but he really is like the hardest working, most energetic person. Marco sometimes jokes around with me because the president and I never traveled together, especially overseas, but really at all. We're never on an airplane together
for the security reasons,
for continuity of government reasons. And so everybody always jokes with me. when you go on one of these 23-hour international trips with Donald Trump, if you're lucky, he'll sleep 2 hours.
Right.
If you're unlucky, he'll be roaming around Air Force One, busting your chops because you've fallen asleep and like, oh, he's low energy. Look, he's already asleep and he's, been on the plane for 18 hours.
He wakes up the journalists for midnight gaggles.
He wakes up the journalists for midnight gaggles. There is just something about him. And I don't know if it's, he's president of the United States for 4 years this term, and he's just so focused on getting as much as possible done. But he really sleeps less and still has more energy than anybody that I know that's 40 years younger than he is. And that is, you hear people talk about it. You wonder how true it is. Trust me, I've seen it from the inside. He has unbelievable energy.
And I quickly wanted to ask you just about having children. You've described your childhood as pretty brutal.
Sure.
Your mother was a heroin addict. And so how do you kind of those parenting skills, you must be you have to invent them yourself, I guess.
You invent them yourself. But I also think this is one of the things that both is motivating about, but also attracted me to my faith is there are, I think, very strong, developed over literally hundreds of years, like Christian principles about how to be a dad, how to be a husband. And I try to follow that as much as possible. I try not to lose my temper when I'm punishing my kids. I try to do it from a place of reason and not from a place of, oh my God, I can't believe you just did that and I'm mad about it. I try to be, strict, but also loving. Like there are all of these things that you learn, I think, from being a Christian that's helpful. I pick a lot of it up from my wife because she grew up in a very, very conventional middle-class household. Her parents are great. They were very good to her and her sister. And so I think she has, and it's crazy, Miranda. I've actually, back before we were flying around in Air Force Two, people would stop my wife all the time at airports and say, you are so good with your kids. Oh. Like we actually would have I remember, I'll never forget this. We had a child psychologist walk up to my wife and say, this is how I counsel people to interact with their kids.
Right.
Because she's just very natural at it. And then some of it
you chose well.
Yeah, I did choose. I chose very well. I'm a very lucky man. But some of it you pick up on the fly. Some of it you try to, I had very good uncles who were very good father figures to me. My grandfather was very involved in my life. So there are definitely things that I pick up, but I also try to remind my kids, what was it we were watching? My son just read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so we watched, the original Willy Wonka, right? The really good one.
Movie, yeah.
Great movie. And, he doesn't really understand Charlie's life. Think about it. He's 8 years old. He's never wanted for anything in his life. And we just, I paused it and tried to talk with my 8-year-old about it. Cause I'm like, buddy, but for the grace of God would be your life. And there are a lot of kids in this country, a lot of kids in the world in particular who struggle with having enough to eat. And that's one of the reasons why we care about what we do is we want to make sure that everybody has access to good shelter and nutritious food and a loving family. And that's one of the reasons why I care about the things that I do. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be vice president. But I try to remind my kids as much as possible that there are kids out there who have very, very unlucky lives. And I think because I had a rougher childhood, I have a different perspective.
That bred resilience, though, didn't it?
It did.
Do you worry that your kids won't have that adversity that
I worry about
drove
that.
You?
Oh, absolutely. I worry about that all the time. My kids have such a fortunate life. They have two parents who love them. Their parents are going to be together forever. Yeah. They're never going to have to worry about where their next meal came from. So in some ways that's what you want for your kids. Yes. But I do worry that lack of adversity will breed a lack of resilience. And so that's why we try to, talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I try to talk about how, there are things that happen in his life that were similar to Daddy's life. And we try to just sort of discuss that with our kids because, you can't force adversity on your children, but you can try to give them a different perspective. And that's what I try to do. But I worry about that all the time because Clarence Thomas made this point to me once. He's a great man, had a much rougher childhood than I did. He once told me that, he used to be resentful about his childhood. Yeah. And now he thinks it was his greatest blessing.
Wow.
Because it gave him a totally different perspective. And I feel the exact same way. I remember being in college and being resentful that, I had to work 3 jobs while some of my friends didn't.
You must have been.
Oh, absolutely resentful of my mom in particular. And now, and by the way, mom's clean and sober for going on 11 years.
Amazing.
We've got a great relationship.
Yeah.
She was actually here this weekend, hanging out with the kids. So mom's doing great. I'm very proud of her.
Yeah.
But when that resentment turns into appreciation, I think it was one of the great gifts of my life. And there are ways in which I didn't have a conventional relationship with my dad growing up, but there are a lot of ways in which the way that I grew up gave me great perspective, and hopefully my kids can benefit from that.
One last question about UFOs. So I'm a mad UFO lunatic as well. Yeah. So, and you said, I think the Ruthless podcast that you were going to, in August, you were going to figure out what happened. So have you
was a little tongue in cheek. I've not figured it out yet. Right. I haven't had the time to figure it out yet.
But you've got access to all this.
I do. And I really want to sort of dig into it. Marco's actually very interested in this too. We talked about this talked about this back in our Senate days. So there's certainly an interest there. There's certainly an intrigue, but I haven't yet had the time to really dig in. Things have been so busy, but this is the crazy person inside of me. And there's, all of us put the tinfoil hat on from time to time. I was like, I can't allow myself to become so busy that I spend the next 3 years and I don't get to the bottom of this. So I will get to the bottom of this, but it's going to take me a little time.
Because Tulsi Gabbard says that she believes there are aliens. Do you believe that?
I don't, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that I do or don't believe it. I mean, I'm a big believer that there are things out there that we can't explain. And so if another person sees an alien, maybe I see an angel or a demon. So I'm a big believer that there are spiritual forces working on the physical world that a lot of us don't see and a lot of us don't understand and a lot of us don't appreciate. But, is it aliens or is it our guardian angel, or is it aliens or is it a not so guardian force that doesn't care about us or in fact actively wishes us harm? I don't know the answer to that question. What I try to do is I try to say my prayers. I try to be as good of a person as I can be, and I try to do a good job. And hopefully that's all I need to do.